Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I would like to welcome you all to ISNA's Friday Reflections program. Thank you for joining us. Today we have with us Sister Namira Islam Anani. So she will be the speaker for the program today. So inshallah, let me go ahead and introduce her. Sister Namira is a lawyer and graphic designer currently residing in Detroit, Michigan. She's the co-founder of the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, which is Muslim ARC. It's a faith-based human rights education organization which focuses on racial justice. She previously practiced in poverty law in Flint, Michigan, worked in prisoners' rights litigation, and interned in international criminal law and war crimes for the United Nations. Her legal background includes research on racism, global education standards, and the UN Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training. Namira has served on the boards of multiple Muslim student organizations and has fundraised for many causes. She is currently an advisor to her late father's organization called Diversified Educational Foundation, which invests in Bangladeshi orphans. Since 2014, she has delivered lectures and workshops on diversity, community, and justice across the country. Please welcome Sister Namira Islam.
Jazakallah khair for that introduction. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much for having me. I want to say thank you to ISNA, first of all, for making this possible, especially during this pandemic. As many people have put it, it's a time for us to be physically distancing, but not necessarily socially distancing. So I really appreciate this opportunity to be able to provide some reflections, just some things that wisdom that I've gained from elders, from youth, from other people throughout, especially the last 10 years. I worked in poverty law as a legal aid attorney for a couple of years, and then served as a director at the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative for 7 years. So it's been my pleasure to learn from people all over the country, as well as people who are often left out of narratives, left out of spaces, the national conversation on who is in need right now. So today's topic, I'd like to talk a little bit about principles, about prayers, and about a prophetic model for our cities, inshallah. So some of these reflections are coming from experience on the ground, working with grassroots organizers as well as community individuals. So many people have come to me over the years talking about the need for some of those stories, some of their experiences, some of their struggles that they're facing, the need for that to be amplified, to be centered, and especially as Muslims, especially as people who believe in this faith, who believe in living out a faith in a way that addresses every single part of our life. It's very important to see, especially American Muslims and American Muslim communities and organizations, address some of these concerns. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit and provide that framework and then some suggestions. The Muslim ARC model especially is to provide a framework and some tools for thinking about certain issues, but then also provide some very strategic action items or action-oriented things that people can do to kind of act on some of the things that we're sharing. So I'd like to follow that model as well today. So a few years back, I was on a call with a sheikh from California, and he posed this question to us, and it really had me and everybody else on the call very quiet and very reflective. So he asked, he said, I want you all to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine that in your neighborhood, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ is living in your neighborhood. And I want you to think 2 or 3 years from now, what would that neighborhood look like? Would it look exactly the same? And that really had me reflecting how many of our neighborhoods and our cities and our states and our country, in fact, how many of us really see that difference, right? Where as Muslims, to be in a space, to be very present in a space, to be thinking about the work that we're doing, about how we're living our lives as Muslims in our neighborhoods, how does that neighborhood look different from us being there? And that has been something that I've been very thoughtful and very mindful of especially when the national conversations around politics are happening, when the national conversations around representation and around challenging Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry. When these things are happening, we still have to be mindful of that principle of thinking about what do our neighborhoods look like. The Prophet ﷺ said that Islam began as something strange, right? And it will return to being something strange, so give glad tidings to the strangers. Sometimes sticking to those principles, really thinking about the work that needs to be done locally, the work that oftentimes is not trendy, is not something that is seen as glamorous or as meaningful work sometimes. That work is oftentimes where our principles need to be. And I wanted to kind of very briefly go over some examples from the Sirah, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, as to thinking about some very intentional disruptions that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was putting into place. His actions were like not just throwing pebbles into a pond, but making very firm, principled stances, addressing some of the greatest areas and the greatest sources of pain as well as oppression in his community. He, peace be upon him, he really focused on aligning with those who are most marginalized in his society. So the Prophet ﷺ, a few areas that are just amazing to think about now, looking at our modern day kind of thinking about social change and social justice work, but some of the actions that were taken by the Prophet ﷺ as well as the companions. Certain things like focusing on, we hear the story a lot about Bilal radiallahu anhu being the first one to call the adhan from the Kaaba. Now, the story that often is not told is thinking too about the second person to call the adhan, which was a man who was blind. And something like that, oftentimes when we're thinking about accessibility, when we're thinking about the events, when we're thinking about our worship spaces, we're not including issues of disability. We're not thinking about how a space will be accessible to people who do not have the same ability to see or to hear or to move, right? And so this is just one area where I'm thinking about some of these practices that were placed during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Something else to really think about is the aspect of women and children, as well as those who are poor and enslaved, right? So as we see, thinking about the societal kind of structures that were put into place, thinking about mobilizing funds to ensure that we were freeing those who were enslaved, that we were supporting women who needed assistance. Nowadays, we see the creation and the amazing facilitation of running certain women's shelters, especially geared toward Muslim women in particular, who are fleeing abusive situations, who are dealing with poverty, who have children. And we have certain centers throughout the country, but oftentimes these centers are not the ones that are the primary focus for support by community members. We're also thinking about poverty. As a poverty lawyer, I was one of the frontline attorneys. And so when people would come in, I might have been one of the first people to speak with them. And some of the issues that are coming up for people who are living under the poverty line in the United States, but also right over the poverty line in the United States, are profound issues. And we have this national narrative around poverty and somebody being poor being some kind of punishment for somebody doing something wrong. It being something that somebody deserved, and that if they had done things correctly, then they would not be facing that situation. But is this an Islamic mindset or a framework that we should be thinking about when it comes to poverty? For a faith, and excuse me, I'm dealing with a cold today. For a faith that is really introducing the concept of zakat, right? That is introducing this concept of ensuring that the prophetic model of speaking to those who are marginalized in society, who are poor, for a faith that has this as such a crucial part of community building, where are we in terms of thinking about those who are poor in our communities? I often see charitable efforts that are geared toward, feeding the hungry, providing things to people who are experiencing homelessness. But if you think about these efforts, while they're amazing, and I don't want to discourage anybody from doing anything that is beneficial, even if it's a small beneficial item, this is still kind of addressing the symptoms, right, of these root causes of poverty, homelessness, and other issues within this country. Especially thinking about the United States and how societal oppression works in this nation, we're seeing so many issues tied to homelessness, where people are not getting the mental health support that they need, where people are dealing with medical debt, when people are one paycheck away from losing where they live, right? And so we have a country where we have extreme wealth inequality, where we have so many different issues that are addressing the lives and impacting the lives of people on the ground, but doing so in a way that when we go to respond to these issues by providing, meals one time, or providing um, tools for people who are experiencing homelessness, and items for them, we're addressing their immediate needs, but we're not necessarily addressing the structural causes. And looking back at the Sira, looking back at the prophetic model, we're seeing this very concentrated effort to think about income and to think about people's resources, to think about partnerships and brotherhood, pairing people from Mecca and Medina, right, to have these kind of cross collaboration type of models of relationships, to ensure that no one is getting left behind, and that there's some broader structure to arrange for these resources getting to where we need them. And we have these experiences within American Muslim kind of charitable giving, as well as other things. But especially today, I wanted to focus on thinking about that structural lens, right? And thinking about how are we not only addressing the immediate needs and providing those direct services to people, but how are we also thinking about that larger structural change? How are we thinking about social change? How are we thinking about principles? If you speak out anywhere about really thinking about poverty, thinking about homelessness, thinking about some of these issues, thinking about hunger in the United States, it's something that oftentimes comes with a lot of backlash, because there are certain structures around corporations and around taxing and around wealth in this country that are very toxic. And I want to caution people from really adopting these mindsets and thinking that to be, a patriotic American is to adopt some of these mindsets around capitalism and around thinking about, poverty and placing the blame on people. The system, this idea of a meritocracy, so many of our communities and so many American Muslims come from backgrounds where somebody might have immigrated to the United States and then rose up from having very little resources to then having a house and having a car and being able to pay off certain things. But this model isn't the same, doesn't hold true for all community members. It doesn't hold true for all individuals when it comes to the system. A meritocracy does not exist in the same way. The biggest determinant of somebody's life kind of expectancy, as well as their educational goals and other attainment, the biggest indicator is oftentimes the zip code in which they're born in the United States. And that says a lot about housing. It says a lot about education. It says a lot about where people are growing up, about the environment, about so many different aspects of local communities. And so this goes back to that first question that I posed, echoing what that sheikh said on that call around how are our neighborhoods different? How is that impact being felt and seen when you have Muslims in a space, right? In college, one of the first after kind of extracurricular activities I did was tutoring after school. And I remember one semester I was tutoring both in Ypsilanti, so both near Ann Arbor, and then in a school in Detroit. And the difference was really stark. And I still remember for the school in Detroit, but after school tutoring, there was one child in particular who I would work with. And he was there not because he needed the tutoring, but because his mom was working multiple jobs trying to make ends meet. And the school didn't really have much else in terms of extracurricular after school activities. So he was in tutoring. He came to tutoring. Another kid in his class was working on, subtracting double digits, and this kid was working on long division, right? So he was advanced for his grade. He was really academically curious, very bright. And I remember one time I came in and we were working on some problems on the board, and I asked him how the MEP testing, so how the standardized testing went. And, we're working on the problem, and he goes, "Oh yeah, no, it went really well. I started filling out the answers and then I stopped filling them out." And I remember I paused and looked down at him and I'm like, "What do you mean you stopped?" And he said, "Well, I finished, I knew I got all the answers right, because this is how smart he was. I knew I got all the answers right up until about halfway in. And then I realized that I was gonna, score better than all the other kids in my class. So I just stopped doing it." And I remember putting down, the chalk that we were working with and talking to him and telling him, one, that was amazing that he was smart enough to be able to pick that up, and that's great. But two, part of it isn't necessarily needing to do this for the sake of what the other kids are doing. Part of it's doing it for the principle of doing it right, and doing the best you can do. So I had him promise me that he was going to try to do better and try to make sure that he wasn't going to do that again. But after I left, I really found myself thinking, and this was really at the time under the Bush administration's No Child Left Behind, right? Policy. And with that policy, like I mentioned, one of the kids in his grade was struggling with math that was more remedial, right? And so after I left, I gave him this pep talk. I talked to him about, doing your best for the sake of doing your best. But I really found myself recognizing the reality that he is in a school that is underfunded. He's in a school that does not have academic after-school programs, that doesn't have the funding for it. He's in a school where the teacher is going to be focusing, because of federal policy, going to be focusing on the kid who is struggling. What chance does this child have, right? What chance does he have to really go from that space of being such an academically brilliant student to then graduating from one of the poorest school districts in the country, right? And this goes back to what I was mentioning about the zip code and about us really thinking about what zip codes are we living in, what impact are we having in these zip codes, and what structural difference are we making. That idea of a meritocracy is very valuable, but I want to make sure that with that principled stance, we're separating the reality that as Muslims, we're doing a good job for the sake of doing a good job, but we are not immune to thinking about how the society is structured to where these oppressive forces are impacting people's everyday lives, right? And so again, as we look back at the prophetic model, we're seeing focus on the environment. We're seeing focus on enslaved people who are enslaved. We're seeing focus on those who are in need, who are experiencing poverty. We're seeing a focus on people who are from different backgrounds, who are from both ethnic, racial, at his that time, thinking about the nationalistic, kind of tribalistic backgrounds, but really looking at these disruptions that were happening, bringing people from different backgrounds together for marriage, right? Not only across class differences, but across tribes and across ethnic differences, putting people from marginalized backgrounds, from backgrounds that are underrepresented in positions of leadership, right? Ensuring that young people are represented, over the treasury, over the finances, ensuring that people who are from different ethnic backgrounds are represented as part of leadership for the community. And these were very intentional disruptions. The Prophet's last sermon talks about this issue of tribalism, of arrogance over one's own creation. And something like this, thinking about racism and how anti-Blackness in particular operates in the United States, we're seeing a modern day form of these nationalistic arrogance over one's own creation, right? Thinking about one's own ethnic background in a way that is prideful in an arrogant way, an asabiya of a different kind of arrogance. We should have self-love and self-worth and admiration and gratitude for our backgrounds and our cultures that we are come from. We have to have a healthy appreciation for these backgrounds, but really thinking about that aspect of being proud over one's own creation, and having this kind of anti-Blackness and discrimination and bigotry and holding that toward other people. This is not the prophetic way. So I want to encourage us to think about those individual kind of day-to-day interactions, the direct kind of responses, the interpersonal things that are happening. When you see discrimination in a masjid, right? When you see discrimination happening against people who are converts, when you're seeing discrimination happening against people who are not of the same class background, right? You're seeing kind of the comments and the interpersonal behavior, but I want to also think about how are we structuring our spaces? How are we ensuring that our funds, when we're donating to certain causes, how are we ensuring that we are giving to certain efforts that are aimed toward eradicating and challenging some of the structural underpinnings of these issues? How are we ensuring that our spaces are created differently so that people who may not find the space welcoming or accessible, that they are able to come and to gain that sense of community with other individuals? And I'll give you one example of this before kind of transitioning to really thinking about some bigger picture issues as well. When we're thinking about the environment, right? Oftentimes the conversation is around recycling. Sometimes we talk about, food waste after events, or we talk about, water or conservation efforts. But I also want to encourage people to think about the aspect of, fast fashion, right? How much are we spending on fashion that is being generated rapidly? And thinking about the wages associated with that work, right? Where are we shopping? Who are we shopping with? Are we shopping locally? Are we supporting local small businesses, right? Thinking about all of these aspects of our work and how we can really make a difference locally, this is part of it. And I especially wanted to mention this in the context of, the elections. We have an incoming administration that is different than what we have seen before. That does not mean, again, give glad tidings to the strangers. We still might be on the outset of certain issues. And I know it is very tempting right now when we are dealing with so much discrimination and bigotry and some of the comments against Muslims, and especially, questioning the loyalty of American Muslims to the American project. It is very easy. It's welcomed and it's encouraged for us to be, aligning as much as possible with some of these national narratives around poverty and around racism and around some of these issues, right? It's very easy to say, oh yeah, like as a person of color, I have not experienced racism. As a Muslim, it's, I haven't experienced certain things, or I know that if I just reach out to more people and as long as they know I'm Muslim, we can fix this. But this really ignores kind of the national structures and the money that is being invested in certain narratives, in thinking about, the military industrial complex, and thinking about the prison industrial complex, and thinking about some of the narratives coming from Hollywood as well as Washington, D.C., right? And so again, glad tidings to the strangers, we have to make that intention and renew that intention of being very deliberate and intentional about standing firm on our principles. Allah tells us in the Quran that we must be persistently standing firm against injustice, even if it be against ourselves or our families, right? Our own people. For persistence, to be persistently standing firm means that we are always reflecting, always taking that moment to pause and think, is this the prophetic way? Is this the prophetic model? Is this how we are supposed to be showing up in our communities? Even if it is risky, even if it is uncomfortable, to be challenging certain things, to be pushing back, to be changing behaviors, to be encouraging other people to change those behaviors, even if it pushes us outside of certain comfort zones, that is the prophetic way to disrupt some of the existing patterns, right? And so I want to encourage people to be thinking about that and taking a moment today, as a tool, as something to be consistently doing, is to step back and really think about that intention. What is my intention as a Muslim, as an American Muslim, regardless of my own background, whether that's along class or gender or ability, or race? what is my purpose in my community? What am I putting forth for the akhirah? How am I showing up in the spaces? Who am I not including when I'm making dua, when I'm donating, when I'm signing petitions or reaching out for certain causes? And so that's really important to be thinking about that big picture. And I want to, as we kind of wrap up, I want to be thinking about the intentionality behind some of this. So again, thinking about that prophetic model, thinking about the principles of it. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that if one of you has, if the day is approaching, right, if the day of resurrection is approaching and you have a sapling in your hand, to still plant it. And this is something that has profoundly impacted the way I look at the work, especially around social justice and social change work. Even if the day of resurrection is near, is tomorrow, and you have a sapling in your hand, then plant it. And this is something very critical because, again, focusing on that principle of it, focusing on sending things forward for the akhirah and not just for the dunya, our intentions, we have to believe firmly and take comfort from the fact that these actions will be rewarded regardless of what the outcome is, right? Planting these saplings, making these disruptions, challenging these existing systems of oppression, ensuring that we are making behavioral changes and encouraging our communities to make these changes as well. These are things that will be rewarded in and of itself for the act. It's planting the sapling. It might not be something that we see in our lifetimes. It might not be a problem that we see completely solved in our lifetimes, but we're still doing it because there is so much barakah in it, because that is what we are called to do. It's not just for the social media clout. It's not just for the results that we see. It's not just for thinking about the reputation of American Muslims. It's for the act itself. It's for Allah. It's for something that we are sending forward. So I want to encourage people to really think about some of these frameworks and especially to think about these particular areas around disability, around poverty, around racism in our communities. That change needs to start within ourselves, right? We have so much wisdom within not just our religious kind of framework and the prophetic model, but from our own backgrounds. So many individuals, when you are in an American Muslim space, if that space is representative of American Muslims, we are the most diverse faith group in the United States in terms of ethnic and racial backgrounds. So imagine if we have a room with that representation, if we have, white American Muslim converts, as well as, the children of white converts, if we have Eastern European Muslims, if we have African Muslims and African American and Black Muslims, if we have South Asian Muslims, East Asian Muslims, and if we have Indigenous and Latino Muslims all in one room together, not only do we have our faith to be drawing wisdom from and to be drawing on for strength and for resilience, but we also have our cultures. We also have our elders. We have our ancestors. We have their examples from challenging oppression in North America as well as throughout the world, to be thinking about fighting off colonialism and imperialism in North Africa, in Indonesia, in the subcontinent, and thinking about the civil rights movement in the United States, and thinking about the indigenous work that is happening in the Americas, and thinking about Bosnia and Eastern Europe and all of these different places, and thinking about all of Africa and Abyssinia and Ethiopia today, thinking about all this wisdom that we have. Our people have been involved in challenging injustice and challenging oppression and really pushing for disruption when we see oppression. And this is a prophetic model, and it is also a culturally rich model. And so that cross-cultural exchange, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13, that he created us in nations and tribes so that we may know one another. So I encourage us to think about not only that prophetic model, but knowing ourselves, knowing our people, knowing where we come from, knowing our cultures deeply, and thinking about resistance and thinking about aligning with those who are marginalized, and then exchanging that, making sure that we are getting to know people across different nations, across different tribes, thinking about that aspect of cross-cultural exchange and learning, and about how our intentions for that is part of being Muslim. And in the United States, we have this beautiful opportunity to be able to gain from all this wisdom, to be able to really exchange with one another and to be aligning with one another to ensure that we are taking care of people who are on the most marginalized fringes of our societies. That is where we need to be aligning as things are happening with the new administration, as we're seeing certain aspects of representation happen. We have to be thinking about the issues as well, and about the principles and the people who are oftentimes left out of these narratives. I encourage people to really be thinking about local work, to be focusing again back to that idea of zip code, right? Thinking about what does spatial and regional racism look like within a locality? Why are certain neighborhoods structured a different way? What are the resources that are provided to certain neighborhoods and not to other ones, right? And how can we really combat and push for this change in a principled way throughout? So on that note, I wanted to encourage some very last steps to be thinking about. One is to be really engaged in very intentional unlearning and relearning. So thinking about the national narratives that it's the water that we're swimming in, the things that we are hearing and seeing and witnessing. How are we unlearning some of these problematic narratives? How are we relearning? Focusing too on your own kind of cultural background, as well as really thinking about the prophetic model. The Prophet ﷺ provided such a beautiful example for us, right? And to be able to draw on the seerah and the experiences gives us so much. And the last thing I would encourage you to really focus locally, to think about who are you learning from? Who are you in partnership with? Right now with the pandemic, things are different, but certain things are now online. And again, even if there's physical distancing, there does not need to be social distancing. So I know that people are struggling and are dealing with so much right now. But the last thing is that I would encourage you to just take a moment today to not only clarify your own intentions and renew your own intentions for what you're doing and why you're doing it, but then also to think about what are some goals for yourself, what are some things that you can commit to do, and what are some ways that you want to accomplish that. I encourage you to check out some of the trainings with Muslim ARC, muslimarc.org. We provide workshops and other trainings as well. You can also reach out to me at any time on my website. It's namiraanani.com. And there are so many other resources and materials that I'd be happy to link you to and provide you to. The last thing I would encourage is today, on this blessed day of Jummah, to please make dua for some of the people, thinking about the lands that we're on, thinking about our ancestors, thinking about those who are on the fringes and who are really struggling and suffering right now. Make dua. That is the most powerful weapon of the believer. And I encourage us all to take those moments for reflection. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for having me. And inshallah, I hope to connect with more of you soon.
Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you so much, Sister Namira, for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you to all our viewers today for joining us in this program. Jazakallah khair to you as well. Inshallah, tomorrow, Saturday, we will be organizing a program online, virtual program. This is about empowering Muslim family in challenging times. This will be at 6 p.m. Eastern. Please visit our website, isna.net. All the links are there. We have invited Imam Muhammad Majid, Dr. Anisa Nadir, and Brother Habib Qadri for that program. So I hope you will be able to join us tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you again for watching. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.